The afternoon sun burned gently over the busy road, and Zainab was pushing her small cart filled with mangoes, oranges, and bananas. Her clothes were simple and a little dusty from walking all morning, but her heart was light. She was saving every small coin she earned so she could send her younger brother Musa to school. As she reached the end of the street, she noticed a black car parked by the roadside. A tall man was standing beside it, looking confused. One of the tires was flat, and though many people passed by, nobody stopped. Some stared for a moment and walked away. Others pretended not to see. Zainab slowed her steps. She looked at the man. He was dressed simply but neatly, not like the rich people who came to the market. His shirt was rolled up, and his hands were dirty from trying to fix the tire. She hesitated at first. It wasn't her problem. She was tired and hungry. But then she remembered her mother's words, "If you can help someone, don't wait to be asked twice." So she took a deep breath, walked up to him and said softly, "Sir, do you need help?" The man turned to look at her. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and his face showed both surprise and relief. "Yes," he said, "but I don't have the tools. The tire is flat and no one around seems to care." Zainab smiled kindly. "Wait here, sir. I'll find something." She ran toward a nearby mechanic shop, one she often passed on her way home. The owner knew her well. "Zainab, what do you need this time?" he asked. "Please, Uncle Bala," she said, catching her breath. "A man's car broke down. I need a spanner to help him." The old mechanic chuckled. "You? Helping with a car?" She nodded seriously. "Yes, I can do it." Amused but impressed, Bala handed her a spanner. "Be careful, my daughter." When Zainab returned, the man looked shocked. "You really came back?" "Of course," she said with a small laugh. "Let's fix it before it gets dark." Together they worked under the hot sun. Zainab's hands were small but strong. She turned the bolts, lifted the jack, and pushed with all her strength. The man tried to help, but she seemed to know what she was doing. "You've done this before?" he asked, curious. "My father was a driver before he passed away," she said quietly. "He taught me a few things." The man nodded slowly. "You're a brave woman." After a few minutes of hard work, the tire was finally replaced. Zainab dusted her hands on her skirt, her face shining with sweat and pride. "It's done," she said cheerfully. The man smiled, almost in disbelief. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "You didn't have to do this." She shook her head. "Helping doesn't cost anything. Maybe one day someone will help me too." For a moment he just stared at her. Her words felt simple but heavy with meaning. Here was a woman with so little, yet she gave so much without asking for anything. "What is your name?" he asked. "Zainab," she replied. "I sell fruits in the market." He nodded. "My name is David. I live in the city." "Nice to meet you, Mr. David," she said politely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some money. "Please take this. You've earned it." Zainab quickly shook her head. "No, sir. I didn't do it for money. I just wanted to help." David was silent for a moment, surprised again. People rarely refused money, especially those who needed it. "At least let me drop you somewhere," he offered. Zainab smiled warmly. "No need, sir. My cart is here. I'll walk." She pushed her fruit cart and started down the road again, the wheels squeaking as she went. David watched her leave, amazed at her kindness and strength. He thought about all the people who had ignored him earlier, people in fine clothes with fancy phones and clean shoes. Yet it was this poor fruit seller, tired and dusty, who had stopped to help. As her figure disappeared into the crowd, David whispered to himself, "There are still good hearts in this world." That night, Zainab went home exhausted but happy. Her hands ached and her clothes were dirty, but she smiled as she told her brother what happened. "You helped a stranger?" Musa asked, surprised. "Yes," she said proudly. "He was in trouble and no one helped him. So I did." Musa nodded slowly. "Maybe one day someone will help us too." Zainab laughed softly and patted his head. "Maybe, little brother. Maybe." Across town, David sat by his window thinking about her again. He couldn't explain why her simple act touched him so deeply. He had everything, money, power, fame, yet he felt something missing in his heart. But today that small woman with kind eyes had reminded him of something important: humanity. He didn't know her story, but he knew one thing for sure: he wanted to see her again. And somewhere in the quiet night, two hearts, one rich, one poor, began a journey neither of them could yet understand. David drove away from the roadside that afternoon, but his mind stayed behind, with the woman who had helped him without hesitation. He couldn't stop thinking about her, The way she smiled even though her clothes were worn, the way she refused his money, and the quiet strength in her eyes. He was used to people treating him differently. In the city, everyone bowed when they saw him. Some smiled only to please him, others followed his orders because of his wealth. But this woman, this poor fruit seller, had done something that no one else had done in a long time. She treated him like a normal person. That night, as he sat in his large mansion, surrounded by gold decorations and tall glass windows, he felt a strange emptiness. The food tasted plain. The lights felt too bright. He thought about Zainab's words again, helping doesn't cost anything. Maybe one day someone will help me too. He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, she didn't even know who I was. She just helped because it was the right thing to do. David was not just a rich man, he was one of the country's most powerful businessmen, known for owning hotels, farms, and real estate companies. But sometimes he dressed simply and drove around by himself to see how ordinary people lived. That day when his tire burst, it was part of one of those quiet trips. He had expected frustration and loneliness. He never expected kindness. Early the next morning, David called his driver Musa and said, I want you to go to the main market. Ask about a fruit seller named Zainab. Find out what kind of person she is. Musa was surprised. Sir, may I ask why? David smiled faintly. Just do it. I met her yesterday. She helped me. Later that afternoon, Musa returned. He stood before David and said, Sir, I found her. Everyone knows her there. They said she's the kindest person in the market. David looked up from his newspaper. What did they say exactly? Musa took a small breath. They said she gives fruits to children who can't afford to buy them. Sometimes when other sellers fight over space, she gives up her spot so peace can stay. And when someone falls sick, she brings them food even though she barely has enough for herself. David sat back in his chair, thoughtful. So it's true, he said softly. Her heart is pure. He stared out the window. The view from his office stretched far. Tall buildings, moving cars, busy people. But somehow, none of it felt as beautiful as the small, dusty street where he had met Zainab. He remembered her standing in the sun, her simple scarf fluttering in the wind as she fixed his tire with careful hands. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't asked who he was. She didn't see a rich man, she just saw someone in need. He smiled to himself. Good hearts still exist, he whispered. That evening, David went to a charity meeting at one of his hotels. Businessmen and women gathered around, talking about donations, projects, and profits. But their words felt empty to him now. One of his partners, Chief Ade, said proudly, We've donated 50,000 to the city orphanage. Everyone clapped. David looked around and said calmly, That's good. But tell me how many of you have helped someone with your own hands? The room went silent. He continued, Money can build schools, but kindness builds hearts. I met someone yesterday who reminded me of that. They stared at him in confusion, but he didn't explain. Some stories, he thought, were not meant for everyone. Some were just meant to change one person at a time. Later that night, David sat in his study, unable to sleep. He kept replaying the memory of Zainab's voice in his head. Just help someone else next time. He took out a small notepad and wrote, Find a way to help her without making her feel small. He didn't want to throw money at her, she had already refused it. He wanted to do something meaningful, something that would make her life easier without taking away her pride. In the quiet of the night, he made a decision. The next morning, he sent his secretary to make arrangements. Find out if there's a small stall for rent in the main market, he said. Something near the front where customers pass. The secretary nodded. Yes, sir. Should I put it under your name? David shook his head. No. Make it look like the government donated it. She doesn't need to know it came from me. By noon, the plan was ready. The Market Council received an anonymous donation to build new stalls for struggling traders. Zainab's name was among the first chosen. When the news reached her, she couldn't believe it. Me? She asked the market leader. Why me? He smiled. Because you deserve it. You're one of the kindest sellers here. Zainab's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, she whispered. From his car parked a little distance away, David watched her reaction. She didn't know he was there. He smiled quietly, his heart warm. For years, he had given large sums of money to charities and organizations, but never before had he felt this kind of peace, the kind that comes from touching one honest life. That night, as the stars filled the sky, David stood by his window once more. Zainab, he said softly, you don't know it yet, but you've changed me. He looked out into the darkness and smiled again. Good hearts still exist, and you're one of them. A few days later, the sun was bright and the market was busy as always. Zainab arranged her baskets of mangoes, oranges and bananas neatly, calling out to passing customers with her usual cheerful tone. She didn't expect that this ordinary morning would change her life again. As she turned to hand change to a customer, a familiar black car stopped across the street. The window rolled down and out stepped the same man she had helped days ago. Zainab's heart skipped. She wiped her hands quickly on her wrapper, unsure if she should wave or stay quiet. David smiled as he approached, dressed simply again, no suit, no sign of wealth, just calm confidence. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Do you remember me?" Zainab nodded shyly. "Yes, sir. You were the man with the flat tire." He chuckled softly. "That's right. You helped me when no one else did." The other sellers stopped what they were doing, curious about the well-dressed man talking to Zainab. Some whispered, others watched closely. David reached into his pocket and handed her a white envelope. "I came to thank you properly," he said. Zainab blinked in surprise. "Oh no, sir, I told you I didn't do it for anything." He smiled kindly. "I know. But please open it." Zainab slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded letter with an official seal. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the words. Then she froze. It was an offer letter, a job as an assistant in one of David's fruit supply companies. Her heart raced. "Sir, this can't be for me." David nodded gently. "It is. I spoke to my company manager. We need someone who understands the market and the people. You have honesty and courage, the two things money can't buy." Zainab's eyes filled with tears. She covered her mouth in disbelief. "Sir, I don't deserve this. I didn't even finish school." David looked at her kindly. "You deserve more than you think. Education teaches the mind, but kindness teaches the heart. And you, Zainab, have both." The people around them watched silently, their hearts moved. Some of the other sellers whispered to each other, realizing how far one good act could go. Zainab clutched the letter tightly. "Thank you, sir. May God bless you." David smiled softly. "You already gave me something I didn't have, faith in people again. The world needs more people like you." For a moment, they both stood quietly in the busy market, surrounded by noise but lost in the peace of that moment. After David left, Zainab sat on her wooden stool, staring at the letter again and again. It didn't feel real. She had lived most of her life being ignored, looked down upon, and treated as if she didn't matter. But for the first time someone saw her, not her poverty, not her rough hands, but her heart. When she went home that evening, her younger brother Malik asked, "Sister, why are you smiling like that?" Zainab showed him the letter. He gasped, jumping with joy. "You're going to work for a company, sister. You'll have an office." She laughed through her tears. "Yes, my dear. God has finally answered our prayers." That night, she placed the letter under her pillow before sleeping. She whispered, "Thank you, God, for remembering me." Meanwhile, in his mansion, David sat on his balcony, looking up at the stars. He smiled to himself, thinking of Zainab's expression when she opened the envelope. He had helped thousands of people through his businesses, but this felt different. Zainab's pure heart reminded him that even the smallest act of kindness could light up someone's whole world. He whispered to himself, "Sometimes the poorest people give the richest lessons." And somewhere in the quiet of the night, two hearts, one rich, one poor, felt the same peace. Zainab's first day at her new job felt like stepping into another world. The office was big, clean, and full of people dressed in fine clothes. She had never seen so many computers and papers in her life. Still, she carried herself with quiet confidence and humility. David had placed her in the marketing department of his fruit company. Her job was simple: to record deliveries and make sure the workers in the field were paid on time. It wasn't easy at first. She didn't understand many of the office words people used, and sometimes her coworkers laughed softly when she made mistakes. But Zainab didn't let that break her spirit. Every morning she arrived before everyone else, sweeping the office, arranging the files neatly, and greeting everyone with a bright smile. Her dedication soon caught people's attention. When someone forgot their lunch, she shared hers. When a cleaner dropped a bucket, she helped pick it up. Bit by bit, her kindness began to change the way others behaved. David often came by to check on the progress of the team. He always noticed Zainab working quietly in the corner, focused and respectful. She never tried to impress anyone. She just did her best every single day. One afternoon, David entered the office with some foreign business partners. They were tall, well-dressed men who spoke with pride. As they sat in the conference room, one of them pointed toward Zainab, who was arranging documents on a table outside. "David," the man asked curiously, "who is that young woman? I've seen her every time I visit. You seem to treat her like family." David smiled gently and looked at her through the glass wall. "That woman," he said softly, "once helped me when no one else did. I was stranded on a hot day with a flat tire. Everyone passed me by, except her. She didn't ask for money or reward. She gave me what money can't buy, kindness." The room fell silent. The businessman looked at Zainab again, this time with new respect. Zainab, who was just outside the room, had overheard everything. Her hands froze for a moment and tears filled her eyes. She quickly looked down, pretending to fix some papers, but inside her heart swelled with emotion. For the first time she realized that her small act, the one she did without thinking twice, had changed someone's life. And that someone had changed hers too. Later that day David walked out of the meeting room and stopped by her desk. "Zainab," he said warmly, "you've done very well. The staff speaks highly of you." She smiled shyly. "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing what I can." David nodded. "That's why you stand out. You remind everyone here that no job is too small and no person too poor to be respected." Zainab looked down, embarrassed but happy. "I just try to treat people the way I wish to be treated," she said quietly. The following weeks brought even more change. The workers in the office began greeting the cleaners with respect. The managers stopped shouting at the drivers. Something about Zainab's presence had softened the whole place. One Friday evening, as the staff gathered for closing time, David called everyone to the front. "I want to thank one person," he said, "for showing us that goodness still exists in this world." Everyone turned to look at Zainab. She covered her mouth in surprise. David continued, "When I met her, I was just another man by the roadside. But she didn't see my car or my clothes, she saw a person who needed help. And that, my friends, is what true wealth looks like." The office filled with applause. Some people even had tears in their eyes. Zainab stood there, speechless, her heart full. That night, as she walked home, the sky glowed with the soft light of the setting sun. She smiled to herself and whispered, "It's true, one act of kindness can change everything." And somewhere far behind her, in his big car, David watched her through the window, smiling proudly. He knew that he hadn't just found a hard-working employee, he had found a rare soul who reminded him of what really mattered in life. The office lights faded, the city calmed, and in both their hearts, gratitude and respect grew stronger. Months later, the city was buzzing with excitement. A grand charity event was being held at one of the biggest hotels, and many powerful people had been invited: business leaders, government officials, and famous guests. But among all the names on the guest list, one stood out quietly: Zainab, the fruit seller who once helped a stranger on the roadside. When she received the invitation, she thought there must have been a mistake. "Why would a big man like Mr. David invite someone like me?" she asked herself. But the letter had her name written clearly, along with a small note at the bottom: "Please come. It would mean a lot to me." Zainab borrowed a simple dress from her neighbor and wore her cleanest sandals. Her heart raced as she entered the bright hall filled with shining lights and well-dressed people. She stood quietly at the back, unsure where to go. Then she saw him, David, standing at the front of the stage, speaking into a microphone. Everyone listened with respect. He looked confident, but when his eyes met Zainab's, he smiled warmly. "My friends," he began, "today is not just about money or business. It is about kindness, something the world needs more of." The crowd nodded politely, not yet understanding where his words were leading. David took a deep breath and continued, "A few months ago, I was stranded on a hot afternoon with a flat tire. Cars drove past me, people looked the other way, but one woman stopped. She was poor, she was tired, yet she helped me without asking for anything." The audience started whispering, curious. Zainab's eyes widened. She wanted to disappear, but it was too late. David turned toward her and said clearly, "That woman is here with us today, Zainab." The hall went silent. All eyes turned to her. Zainab froze, her hands shaking as David beckoned her to come forward. Slowly she walked toward the stage. David smiled gently. "What she doesn't know," he said, "is that I am not just a businessman. I am the owner of several companies in this city. I am," he paused, "a billionaire." A loud gasp filled the room. Cameras flashed. People began murmuring in surprise. Zainab stood there, speechless, staring at him. David looked at her and said softly, "This woman reminded me that true wealth is not money but a kind heart." The room erupted in applause. Zainab's eyes filled with tears as the crowd clapped and cheered. She couldn't believe what was happening. David reached into his pocket and held out a small golden key. "Zainab," he said, "this is the key to something very special. A new foundation built in your name to help poor families and street children get education and care. It is called the Zainab Kindness Foundation." Her mouth fell open. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Say nothing," he replied kindly. "You already said everything when you helped a stranger that day." The applause grew louder. People stood up to honor her. For the first time, Zainab felt that her small act had created something big, something beautiful. After the event, reporters surrounded her. "Madam Zainab, how does it feel to be the reason behind this foundation?" one asked. Zainab smiled shyly and said, "I didn't do anything special. I only helped someone who needed help. Maybe the world just needs more of that." That night, as she rode home in David's car, she looked out the window and saw the same road where they had first met. The streetlights still flickered. The wind blew softly. She smiled to herself, remembering how everything began with one act of kindness. Later at home, Zainab stood by her small window and looked up at the stars. Her life had changed completely, not because she had dreamed of riches, but because she had chosen to do good even when she had little. From that day on, whenever Zainab saw a stranded traveler or someone in need, she stopped without thinking twice. She would say, "Helping doesn't cost anything," just as she did that first day. And somewhere, David would often smile when he thought of her, the woman who taught him that kindness was the greatest wealth of all. The story of Zainab spread far and wide, inspiring others to show compassion and humanity. The foundation grew, helping thousands, and every year on the same date they met, David and Zainab would gather under the same sun and remember how a simple act changed two lives forever.